I want to say this, and I'm going to say it just once.
This is today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to TNT. Today's News Talk. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Thank you for rejoining us. We're still in the first hour of this live broadcast. I want to welcome onto the stage a very special guest. George Szamuely is joining us. He's a geopolitical analyst based in Budapest, Hungary, joining us on the live link right now. George, thank you for coming on TNT this week.
Yeah, it's always very good to be with you, Patrick.
It's great to be with you as well, George. I'm sure there's a lot we can talk about, certainly with the foreign policy front, the 2024 U.S. elections coming up. How is the situation in Ukraine going to bear down on the incumbent, especially the Biden administration? And how is this going to be playing out on the GOP side, which is getting thinner by the moment? Love to get your comment on that. But there was a story that did break, George, in the last couple of days, which is an American YouTuber, citizen journalist who got a very big reputation over the last couple of years by being a major pundit on the Ukraine conflict. His name was Gonzalo Lira. And it was reported that he is, in fact, had died in captivity in a Ukrainian prison, I believe, in Kharkiv, the city in northeastern Ukraine. And his family also has weighed in on this publicly. There were calls for the U.S. government to do something, that he was being wrongly detained for basically having opinions that were against the Zelensky government. That's what was playing out over the last couple of months, and I know people in the State Department knew about it. It was brought up at press briefings there within the State Department. A number of journalists have brought up the issue. It was acknowledged, but nothing was done, which was pretty incredible, George. I know that you also work with and have been on shows, I don't know if side by side with Gonzalo. What are your general thoughts on this, on him, and the latest news and how it's played out? Go ahead, George.
Yes, Gonzalo appeared a few times on our the Gaggle podcast that I do with Peter, that you have also appeared regularly on. So, and I also appeared on one of Gonzalo's roundtables. He was and obviously a very intrepid blogger, YouTube filmmaker. He was clearly taking his life in his hands by openly defying the Ukrainian government. And he was arrested at a very early stage of the war, I think sometime in the spring of 2022. And then he was released after some time. And people were afraid that at the time that he may be dead. There were rumors that he was dead. And so that's why when we heard the other day that he was dead, I felt that, well, we should be a little bit skeptical because this has happened before, but obviously now it has been confirmed. It is indeed absolutely shocking that the U.S. State Department did nothing to protect the life of a U.S. citizen, and particularly given that the U.S. citizen had issued messages in which he had alleged that he was being tortured. You know, he said there were matchsticks that were stuck into his eyes. He also said that he was being extorted. They were trying to squeeze money out of him and his family to secure his release. And this has now been confirmed again by his family that they were seeking something like $500,000 for his release. So all of this was known by the State Department. And yet, to all intents and purposes, it did nothing. And we know it did nothing because had it wanted to do something, it could have done it. I mean, Ukraine is a wholly owned subsidiary of the United States. So all it would have taken is one telephone call from Antony Blinken to say, release this American citizen, deport him if you must. But you can't go on imprisoning him and torturing him, particularly as he hasn't really done anything other than he has issued videos that the government doesn't like. He hasn't committed any crimes. They just don't like his message. So for the administration just to sit on its hands and allow an American citizen to be tortured to death in the state of an ally. This isn't happening in Iran or somewhere where America has virtually no diplomatic relations. This is in the state of an ally that is basically always on the phone several times a day. So it is a gross negligence on the part of the U.S. government, and other than these few citizen journalists like the Gray Zone and Max Blumenthal and the rest who have raised this issue of Gonzalo, none of the mainstream media has.
They haven't, and the important thing is there was an opportunity to intervene and possibly save the life of this person. And where does the U.S. government stand on this? Because George, I've grown up, and you've watched U.S. politics over the years. There's always a big priority. Washington will move quickly to save the life of even one American, be it a journalist, be it a citizen, even if they're in a situation maybe that they shouldn't be in. The government will still move to secure their safety and release. I've seen it countless times over the years, George, especially if they are high profile pundit. And Gonzalo Lira was very high profile. So is this a case of that he had the wrong message, George? And in this era of power politics, where it's all about who and whom and not the substance of the argument, that they just decided, well, Gonzalo, he's not really helping our cause, so we'll just leave him there. I mean, is that the level of crassness, or was he was he a liability to Washington? I mean, how serious of a threat is someone like that to the United States?
I don't see him as being any kind of a threat to the United States. I mean, he was, he had these roundtables, but he was a part of a network of many journalists and commentators and analysts. So he didn't stand out from anyone else. I mean, he's not, didn't stand out from, Ray McGovern or all the other people who would regularly appear on those roundtables. I think he had the wrong views, and they just simply couldn't care less about him. They're so wedded to Zelensky and the Kiev regime that anyone who opposes it, they just don't do anything about it. I mean, we just as an example, I mean, the Kiev regime is engaging in open religious persecution. It's imprisoning priests. It's shutting down churches, looting churches, and the administration says nothing about it. Just nothing. It just couldn't care less about this. So, in this case, they just thought, oh, it doesn't matter to us. Now, contrast that with how they've been responding to the case of the Wall Street Journal reporter who is under arrest. He's charged with espionage, and the administration has been talking nonstop about this reporter. And even though in his case, in this reporter's case, obviously we don't know the details, the charges are quite serious. I mean, they're saying he was in this arms factory town, and he was asking all sorts of questions about work schedules, production, and so on. So these are serious matters. We're not prejudging the case or anything, but at least there's substance here. Unlike in the case of Gonzalo Lira, where it's just his opinions. They just didn't like the views he was expressing. But there's no case here that he was engaged in espionage or anything else.
On the Ukrainian side, I think the accusation, George, that I heard was that Gonzalo gave up Ukrainian troop positions in Kharkiv. I can't see how that is credible, because right now there's so many live maps and live blogs on the internet. You can literally look at every single piece of armor, every single soldier, practically track them by the minute with open source data on the internet. How could Gonzalo possibly? I mean, so that's completely ridiculous. And it seemed like, I don't know, he did say that a lot of money was extorted from him beforehand. So while he was in prison, he said a fortune, basically. I would think it would be north of $50,000 at the very least.
Easily,
so,
more than that. Yeah. And now,
yeah,
what we're hearing from his lawyer is that they wanted 500,000. And I have no idea how his family could come up with that kind of money, but this was clearly extortion, and clearly torture. I mean, the fact that he actually made these claims, hey, there were sticking matches into my eyes, you know, even if, let's say, he's just exaggerating, it wasn't as bad as that. What did the government do about it? The government would say, well, they would at the very minimum get on the phone and say, well, what the hell's going on here? What are you doing here? And again, say, you don't like this guy, just throw him out of the country. But don't imprison him for month after month, and then torture him. And this, he dies in his mid-50s, and there's pneumonia. That's a treatable condition. So this is clearly sadistic neglect to allow him to die of pneumonia. This isn't terminal cancer or whatever. This is pneumonia where a man in his 50s, clearly he just wasn't getting any proper medical attention. Therefore, it's entirely consistent with what he had been saying from the messages that he'd been able to get out, particularly during the time that he made his attempt to escape and was then recaptured. So, again, if this had been, let's say, the Trump administration, and there was somebody else, from some other country, and the Trump administration had done so little to help out an American citizen, the media would be going absolutely crazy. But instead, the attitude is, hey, he got what was coming to him. So, again, it shows, as in the case of Julian Assange, which is also gets very little media attention, that, well, if somebody does, wrong things, has wrong ideas, wrong thing, we just don't care too much about him.
No, that is the atmosphere. That is the sort of hyper partisan atmosphere as well. He was derided by the Daily Beast. Yes. I even think he was doxxed. He was doxxed by the Daily Beast. I mean, so those journalists in America from those publications, I don't want to say journalistic publications with regards to the Daily Beast, because that would be pushing the envelope. Okay, right. They have a lot to answer for in being kind of an accessory to getting him imprisoned in the first place, and also the bizarre, self-proclaimed Ukrainian military spokesperson, the trans.
Oh yeah, the weird. Yeah, that's right. And he was gleeful, absolutely giddy with excitement, and threatening his life, and pretty much saying that, see what happens to him is going to happen to others. He was really horrific, and he was a spokesperson. He wasn't just simply some independent blogger. He was actually a spokesperson for the Kiev regime, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that the way the Daily Beast and others presented it is that what he's getting what is coming. And again, it recalls the many years of the captivity of Julian Assange back when he was first in the Ecuador embassy, and then subsequent to that, the arrest and the imprisonment in Belmarsh in the UK. I mean, all of the stories in the media were running. Oh, he was a rapist. That there's no threat at all to his life. The United States doesn't want to get his hands on him. He's just afraid to face the rape charges in Sweden. And then there were all the stories about what a pig he was in the Ecuador embassy, and so on. One doesn't even have to go through them. It was just so revolting, these accusations, and that of course helped the U.S. government's persecution of him, because it said, well, people don't really care much about him. We can do what we like, because ultimately there isn't going to be too much of a fuss about him.
Yeah, I think that spokesperson, Sarah Ashton Cirillo, a.k.a. Michael Cirillo, a.k.a. Big Mike, as he's known by some. That's just bizarre to say the least. But, the last video he made, the one where he was attempting to cross over into the Hungary border, he made a video. He said he was 5 kilometers away from the border, and he said he'd been beaten and had suffered edema and inflammation because he'd been beaten so hard in the chest by other prisoners. So the guards or the SBU were getting other inmates to rough him up,
Right.
maybe promising them something. But what he said about those injuries actually does line up and coincide with the final cause of death, because he's talking about edema, possible pleurisy,
Right.
exacerbated by pneumonia. He would have been in need of a major medical intervention, maybe antibiotics or thoracentesis or something. But it was, as you said, George, completely treatable. So it's interesting, George, as well. This also draws comparisons to another story, which is the story of Sergei Magnitsky. The parallels there, who also, by all accounts, even some Russian accounts, was suffered neglect in terms of getting medical treatment while he was but the way they blew that story up in the West, I mean, they even named legislation after it. And this situation here, nobody cares. Nobody cares. I mean, to me, it's an indictment of the media, of the hyper partisan environment that's been constructed around these issues, and the fact that people just are putting politics over principle. I think this is one of the main problems that has caused this situation to happen. And like you said, George, it's tragic. Gonzalo was living life on the edge.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
you're absolutely right. Because in the case of Magnitsky, I mean, obviously it's terrible what happened to him. You know, his death. But I think he was clearly suffering from poor health. But I mean, but nonetheless, the way the media presented it, like for instance, they described him as a lawyer. He was Bill Browder's lawyer. He was, of course, nothing of the sort. He was not a lawyer. He was never a lawyer. He was Bill Browder's accountant. And then he was in prison because he was accused of all kinds of accounting tricks that both he and Browder had engaged in order to screw the Russian government out of taxes. Again, that the case against him didn't come to trial, but nonetheless, the case against Browder is very, very compelling, and we know that from the video deposition that you can find online when he was actually testifying with an American lawyer, and he was making all manner of very, very damaging admissions against himself. He was forced to, and that was what he and Magnitsky were engaged in. You know, all kinds of extremely creative accounting ploys to avoid paying taxes. But the media presented it as if somehow Magnitsky was this human rights lawyer, and he was in prison and died in prison as a kind of a martyr to his fighting for human rights. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth.
No, that's true. It's a lot of inconsistency with some of these stories. I want to get into also the Ukraine story in general, George. We're going to go to break in a couple of minutes, but there's been a few developments before we go to break. Can you comment on the current situation right now politically in Kiev? And there's a lot of admissions coming out, a lot of revelations about peace deals that were ignored over the last couple of years, opportunities to get some kind of resolution with Russia. All this stuff was deep sixed. What is the current situation right now in Kiev, George?
Well, the tragedy of it goes, that war could have been settled right at the beginning. It could have just ended in March and April. I mean, we've had many statements already, over a long period of time. We had the statements from Turkey's foreign minister who said, we were very close to an agreement in Istanbul. We know, and we knew from the start that when Boris Johnson flew into Kiev, he essentially went in with that message: don't sign any kind of agreement with Russia. We've got Russia on the run. We can win this war against Russia. That has been the consistent Western theme. So whereas the Ukrainians were ready to do at least a sensible thing then, but instead they were kind of pushed to go along with this plan, which has led to the complete destruction of their country. I mean, we don't know at this stage, what the level of the casualties is, but it is obviously of an absolutely staggering, horrific number. And so what we've heard in the last few weeks have just been confirmation of what we already knew, which was a very good deal for Ukraine was available. Not a particularly good deal for Russia, but a very good deal for Ukraine was available. All Ukraine then had to do essentially was simply to say no to NATO, and that would have secured them. The Donbass, and even Crimea. They could have worked out some kind of an agreement. But instead, through their encouragement, I mean, basically the country has been destroyed.
No, that's looking more and more like what actually happened, and sort of people starting to realize this. It's starting to hit home. The penny has dropped. It took 2 years to drop, but it's finally dropped, at least for some people anyway. We'll talk about whether it's dropped in Washington or not. Or are they still off in the alternative reality that is the Beltway on this, the fog of foreign policy? George, now let's talk about where the rubber is going to meet the road. The 2024 election cycle, it's off to the races. The Iowa caucuses have convened. All of the little confabs in the 99 counties of this Midwestern state that nobody really pays attention to, except once every 4 years. Yeah. And a historic blowout by Donald Trump of the GOP field. So let's talk about the GOP field. And I want to talk about in relation to foreign policy and in relation to Ukraine, how you see these issues affecting the race. And then let's talk about the Biden administration in 2024. Is Ukraine a noose around the neck of this White House? We know that Gaza has become a noose around their neck as well. But let's talk about the GOP field first. We've got some very strident characters still in the field, people who love a good war, like Nikki Haley from South Carolina. What's your assessment so far?
Well, I think you summed it up very well. I think Nikki Haley is the neocons candidate. She's the Republican Party establishment candidate. She didn't do terribly well in Iowa. She was expected to come in second. She came in third, but nonetheless, she's still expected to do well in New Hampshire. And if she does reasonably well, at least comes, within, let's say 10 points of Trump, then I think the party, all the neocons, interventionists, will rally around her and the donors, and they will push her as the neocon alternative to Trump. And then they can just go on, giving her enough money just to make it a horse race going into the convention. I think DeSantis will probably fade away if he doesn't do terribly well in New Hampshire. He really doesn't want to go to South Carolina and then to Florida and get humiliated there. So I think he probably will drop out if he doesn't do well in New Hampshire. And then so she'll be the alternative. And she almost certainly will not win the nomination, but she will be in a very strong position for 2028 because she got into this race. The other party heavyweights, or Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, all of the people who are, a potential presidential contenders, they didn't get into this race. She got in, and she did reasonably well. Certainly, she beat all expectations. Her candidacy was initially regarded as a joke. She'll be in a very strong position in 2028, and then essentially you're going to have a pure neocon, a George W. Bush Republican who could be the front runner for 2028. But of course, there are all sorts of unknowns as far as this election is concerned, which is how will the various criminal indictments of Trump affect the general election, because at least one of those cases will probably be decided upon. The case, the January 6th case in DC, will probably be decided upon sometime before the election. It will almost certainly result in a conviction of Trump, and how that will affect the election. I mean, so far the indictments haven't hurt him. It's nonetheless a possibility that a criminal conviction may force some people to hesitate about voting for Trump.
I don't know, George. I've seen some T-shirts in Iowa of Trump's mugshot when he did the perp walk, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
literally the best-selling T-shirt. Like Trump supporters are wearing, they're almost brandishing it with pride. He's been like well and truly martyred, George.
yeah,
It's almost like
yeah.
I think the convictions and the indictments were actually the secret weapon because his campaign was flagging a bit in the polls last spring, if you remember. And then when those indictments came in, boom, you saw the support just shoot up. I mean, is that something that the Democrats were anticipating? I mean, is this some secret conspiracy by design, or have they just pulled the ultimate own goal with this?
I think
Yeah,
it's more the own goal. I mean, the problem that they had was that they overplayed their hand, which people often do. If they'd just settled on one case against him, then that might have there might have been more compelling. Well, all right, well, you did this, so that will take it. But by going in for four separate cases, four different jurisdictions, and as if that wasn't enough, then they tried to get him off the ballot using the 14th Amendment, and then as if that wasn't enough, then they brought a kind of a civil suit in New York State in order to take his money and property away. So they kind of really overplayed their hand, and of course then Trump can say, "Hey, I'm being crucified. I mean, they're just coming after me because I'm a threat to them." And it's a compelling argument to say, yeah, I mean, why else would they be coming up? They wouldn't be coming after him if he'd said after 2020, that's it, I'm done. I'm retiring from politics. I mean, you could be absolutely certain that they would never have gone after him because of that. It's the very fact that he decided he was going to come back that they brought all of the guns in, but it's too much. It's excessive, and particularly as the cases that they're bringing against him are cases that have never been brought against a former president. I mean, it's ridiculous. For instance, that he has his own secrets with him when he leaves the White House. And of course, every president has walked away with classified documents from the White House. They're his documents. I mean, it's allowed by law. But I mean, do we really want to go through Obama's basement, see what documents he walked away with, or George W. Bush, what documents he walked away with? It's nonsensical. I mean, so the whole idea that bringing this against Trump and then suggesting he was engaged in some espionage when he could have done it during the 4 years he was in power. I mean, if he really wanted to sell the country's secrets, he could have done it quite openly while he was in the Oval Office. So it's obviously comes across as a special case against Trump.
So on just quickly, I want to go to the Biden side on this, but on the GOP side, the Republican primaries, foreign policy, three big pieces: Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, China, Taiwan. So it seems like the Ukraine one has been pushed to third place in the GOP conversation. It's Israel first, China second, need to be tough on China. And then Ukraine, it's almost like, we don't really want to talk about that right now. It used to be, we need to push back the Russians. That's not happening. So, how do you see this one shaping up? And because this is bound to change if there's any new revelations or any new activity on the Ukrainian-Russian front. Go ahead, George.
No, and there could certainly be all sorts of changes. But what's interesting with the three issues you raised, there's more or less agreement within the GOP on the issue of China and on the issue of Israel-Palestine. I mean, all Trump and his opponents, they're all basically very gung-ho about Israel and generally very hostile to China. The one area in which there is disagreement is in Ukraine. Nikki Haley, she's all in. In fact, she accuses Biden of not doing enough for Ukraine. Mind you, she also accuses Biden of not doing enough for Israel, so that she's consistent there. But Ukraine is the one where there is a difference of opinion, and of course, there's all sorts of things that can happen between now and the election on Ukraine, and I do expect things to happen. Because, I mean, as I've argued, though people disagree with me, I do think NATO will try to induct Ukraine into NATO at the July summit. The 75th birthday party. This will be this big event and this will be NATO's 75th birthday present to itself. We will get Ukraine in, at least the part of Ukraine that isn't lost to Russia, and then that, who knows what the effect will be of that. But this is a very reckless administration. Biden is a very reckless president, and I think they won't pass up this opportunity to make some grand historic gesture, even if it leads to a catastrophe.
No, absolutely, absolutely. That's something to look forward to. Also, on the Democratic side, as you know, there's no Democratic primaries to speak of. They managed to get rid of Robert F. Kennedy, managed to get rid of the whole primary process together. I don't know what's going on that side. But so Ukraine's a major noose around the neck of the White House. Financially, it's not a winnable conflict. It can only really get worse going forward. And you have this congressional effort to impeach Joe Biden on corruption. And a lot of the corruption that they're flagging up in these investigations is related to Ukraine. So this adds another dimension to Ukraine. I mean, this is literally the reputation, the legacy of the Biden administration. And I'm going to say, George, the whole Democratic Party is actually resting on this. They want it to go away, but it's not going away. I mean, there's just too much evidence there, and there's whistleblowers coming forward. You got Andrei Durkash. We'll be talking about a recent interview he did with journalist Simona Mangianti in the second hour. But what kind of is there an exit out of this, or is it sandbag the impeachment investigation, George? What's going to happen here?
There is obviously an exit, which is that to come to some kind of an agreement on Ukraine. I mean, basically revive some Helsinki 2.0 kind of revival of the 1975 Helsinki Final Accord, in which everybody's security concerns are taken into account, and something is worked out on Ukraine. The Biden administration will never go down that path. It's absolutely determined to pursue this war as long as there are enough Ukrainians to go on being sent to the battlefront. And so I think it is an absolute disaster for the administration. There are no positives at all. They get attacked by the Republicans under Trump, and ultimately, it is very dangerous for the United States. The United States is getting itself into a confrontation with a nuclear superpower, but Biden, it doesn't seem to relent. However, it's politically not a winner for him. But the same applies to the situation of Israel and Gaza. It's politically not a winner for him. The Republicans attack Biden for not doing enough for Israel. Whatever he does, it's never enough for Israel. But his own base is obviously very unhappy by the fact that he is enabling this absolute horror in Gaza. And he's simply not willing to do what he could do, just as we were talking about Gonzalo Lira, what he could easily do, get on the phone to Kiev. In this case, get on the phone to Netanyahu and say, enough is enough. We just can't take this anymore. In the way that President Reagan did to Menachem Begin at the time in 1982. We just say, look, we can't, or James Baker, who cracked down on Israel, said we're not providing you with any more loan guarantees as long as you keep building settlements in defiance of U.S. policy. So other presidents have done this. I mean, it was already a long time ago, but Biden was never going to do that. And so essentially the U.S. is directly responsible for the horrors taking place in Gaza. And I think that it's upsetting his base. He's going to lose votes. People are just not going to vote for Biden. But some reason they are so wedded ideologically to these positions that nothing, whatever, is going to shift them. That's why their only remedy is, how can we destroy Trump? I mean, they don't have any other message to American voters other than Trump is terrible, Trump is Hitler, Trump is a dictator. Trump will, introduce a concentration camp. and we have to, get him off the ballot, do something with it, put him in prison, but we can't allow people to vote for him.
Yeah, it's either attack Trump, get rid of Trump, or escalate the war. Like these are the only two options. But it's interesting. Got a couple minutes left, George. I'll give you the final call on this. But it just seems to me if we pull the string, George, back to 2014, no, to 2012, to 2013, the amount of activity that Joe Biden did as a vice president for Barack Obama in Ukraine, the amount of business, it looks like side hustles galore with his son Hunter, Burisma. There's the reverse gas scandal. There's bribery allegations that have come up in the FBI recordings as well. So, I mean, it seems like the Democrats had to put him into power to cover up that whole debacle. Then the Trump impeachment one was about covering that up, saving Biden. Running was to bury all that. Escalating the war in Ukraine was to bury all that. It just seems like one crisis was to cover up the previous crisis. Have we not seen this pattern before, George, in U.S. foreign policy interventions?
You're absolutely right, because if you recall, immediately after the seizure of power in Maidan, these people, this Democratic Party figures, such as Hunter Biden, such as John Kerry's stepson, they moved into Kiev and got themselves all of these very lucrative positions. And this was, this went on, and they were essentially just stealing, left and right from Ukraine. And you're absolutely right. Some of this was known by journalists, and they sort of reported it in a half-hearted sort of way, but they did report this what Hunter Biden was doing at Burisma and so on. But they had to then cover this up when Trump, I think in a very reasonable way, went to Zelensky and said, well, can you just find out what the hell the Obama administration was up to in Ukraine? Which is the responsibility of any U.S. president? What are we, in for? What have we got ourselves on the hook for? And then he told Zelensky, basically, whatever you find out, tell the Attorney General. The Democrats, and they're very clever like this, they turned it around and made it as if somehow Trump had behaved in some horrific way. Incidentally, even on the election interference, the Democrats who made that fraudulent story about Russian election interference in 2016, of course, the real story was Ukrainian election interference in 2016, because the Ukrainians went all in to try to prevent Trump from winning. You had
That's another rabbit hole, George, that we don't have time to go down, but you've opened up a new front of discussion there. Hopefully we can continue this. George Szamuely, Global Policy Institute, geopolitical analyst, host of the Gaggle, great podcast. Thank you for joining us on TNT this week.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I really enjoyed it.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is George Szamuely. Follow him on X, Twitter. Follow his show, The Gaggle. It's a great talk show, great podcast.